I'm Phyllis Mann, Director of Emergency Management for Kitsap County. With me today is Dr. Scott Lindquist, Director of Kitsap Health District. And today we're going to be talking about H1N1, or as you know it, the swine flu. So let's start, Scott, with this is now September. We've been through the spring of something brand new for us, H1N1 or swine flu. It's now September. Kids are going back to school. We have flu in Wazoo, and we heard it in Gonzaga. It's all over the United States. Tell us what's going on now with our H1N1.
Right. I think to summarize what happened is we saw this new virus, this H1N1, or what most people are calling swine flu. So we'll use that term interchangeably, swine flu or H1N1. We saw this appear in the spring, and it really hasn't left us. We have gained a lot of experience, so we're able to know who is the most likely group to get infected, which tends to be kids. Those 0 to 5 and then even 5 to 20, those are the most common groups that are getting infected. It appears to remain mostly fever with cough and or a sore throat. There have been some hospitalizations in the county. There have been a couple deaths, but the majority of people have gotten this have had pretty mild illness. Those that really were hospitalized or had death from this actually had underlying conditions. And so since then, we're still seeing sporadic cases, and our big concern right now, and the reason why we're meeting again to talk, is now that all the kids are back in school, like WSU and Gonzaga, we'll probably see more cases coming from people getting together.
Well, I have a series of questions that I'd like the public's been asking.
Sure.
We get a lot of phone calls between the Health District and Emergency Management. So let's start with what is the difference between H1N1 and seasonal flu?
Well, influenza every year is common, and it comes in the fall to late winter, usually December in our county. It's usually fever, cough, all the things that we're describing with H1N1. And we create a vaccine for it, and there are quite a few hospitalizations every year from this. But this year, we saw a new virus, a virus that we had not seen before. It's called H1N1, which had pieces of human flu DNA and also genetic material from both swine and from bird influenza. So it was a novel virus that no one had seen before. And fortunately, it wasn't a serious life-threatening influenza that came. We all thought about pandemic,
right,
and we all assumed pandemic meant bad, but what we really learned in this one is pandemic just really means widespread. So yes, this is a pandemic influenza that appears to be across the globe, but fortunately is not a serious infection. It seems to be on par with the seasonal influenza. So what we have in this year, in this flu season, we have seasonal influenza plus H1N1, which has never really gone away since the spring.
So theoretically, if I understand you correctly, you won't know what you've got. You've either got the flu or you might have H1N1.
Yeah, and I think
but either way, you've got the flu.
Yeah, and I think it's even more complicated than that, because flu tends to come during the respiratory virus season. So there's other respiratory viruses like the common cold or things called adenovirus or RSV or parainfluenza virus, which also look like influenza. So yeah, it's confusing, and I think it's a good time for us to remind ourselves the control of most of these viruses are very similar. Yes, influenza, seasonal influenza, has its own vaccine. And now we'll see in the next couple weeks a vaccine for H1N1. But some of the other viruses don't have vaccine or treatments. So the control of those is usually through all the things we've been talking about, all the things your mother taught you when you were a kid. Cover your cough. So that means coughing into the bend of your arm, washing your hands, and staying home when you're ill. Don't go to school and don't go to work if you're ill so that we don't spread it. Those will help control the spread of these other respiratory viruses too.
Okay. Let's see. So is there a greater concern about H1N1 spreading in our school than seasonal flu?
No, I don't really think there's a bigger concern. It's just another virus that's spreading. And so we want to do the best we can to prevent any respiratory viruses of spreading in the school. And again, like I say, the cover your cough, don't go to school when you're sick, is really kind of ramping up now because of this novel virus, not because it's more severe. And it's just good practice for all respiratory viruses.
It is my understanding, as a government employee, that the federal government has paid for and developed with the pharmaceutical companies' swine flu vaccine or H1N1 vaccine, and that there are only certain categories of individuals who will be authorized to receive that vaccination. How did they decide what group is going to get H1N1 vaccine?
Right, and I think this is a good time to remind ourselves who these priority groups are, because this gets a bit confusing. Who is a priority group for seasonal influenza and who is a priority group for H1N1? Most of the prioritization comes from epidemiology, or the science of who gets infected by these diseases. And H1N1 is a little bit different in its priority groups, because like I said earlier, it really is a disease of young kids. Why older folks are not getting it, it's not clear. The thoughts on this are older folks have probably seen some relationship to a virus that is similar to this one, so they have some immunity. It's very clear that those older than 65 are not getting this disease at the same rate as kids are. So let's take a sec to talk about who the priority groups are. And for the first one, for seasonal influenza, we're really talking about pregnant women first. And then for child age vaccine, it's really those 6 months to 19 years of age. And then, this is different than the H1N1 vaccine. We're recommending people 50 and older receive their seasonal influenza. That's what we're used to every year. We're also talking about people with chronic medical conditions. So these are the folks with asthma and COPD, underlying heart disease, cancer, or immune compromising disorders. Then, really people that take care of any of these risk group folks. So that's us taking care as parents or as grandparents, any of these conditions we talked above. And then healthcare workers for sure. Healthcare workers or those that work in nursing homes and folks in nursing homes. So really, at the end of the day, I can almost fit any citizen in Kitsap County into the seasonal influenza category. The more complicating one is the H1N1. This is the one where we talked about the epidemiology is really suggesting it's more a disease of children. And so that's why the recommendations are a little bit different. And here they are. Number one, pregnant women again, because they have high risk of complications from getting H1N1 vaccine. And then, again, we're talking about children, but this age group's a little different. It's 6 months all the way up to age 24. We are also talking about those that are a little bit older, 25 to 64, with these underlying conditions I talked about before, especially those with asthma, especially those with COPD. Those are the conditions that we really want you to be getting the H1N1 vaccine. And again, healthcare workers and emergency workers that are out in the community. So you're right, the federal government has made this vaccine. I actually think the federal government has done a pretty good job of taking this serious, really pushing the messages of prevention, and then working with vaccine manufacturers to get in our hands as quickly as they could vaccine to get these high-risk groups. Now, that still doesn't happen fast. And so what we're talking about is likely seeing the H1N1 vaccine in the community in mid-October.
Okay.
Okay? And the goal there is to really get this out through our primary care physicians. We have met in this county with every primary care group, and we also send nurses out to every office to meet with every office to tell them about these priority groups, tell them how the vaccine is coming, and make specific arrangements with each provider's office. So the best I can tell you right now before the vaccine gets here is to please check with your primary care provider to see are they going to offer this vaccine. If they do not, the Health District and Department of Emergency Management will make sure there are avenues for everyone who fits these priority groups to get your vaccine.
If somebody gets, let's shift gears just a little bit. If somebody gets the flu, H1N1, swine flu, how long are they going to be sick for?
Well, you know, it's variable. When we talk about what is the case definition for H1N1, it's fever, cough, and or sore throat. But there clearly are some people that have other things like nausea, vomiting, muscle aches, and some people can have this for a day or two. Some folks had no fever whatsoever and probably didn't really even think they had the flu. So it's variable. Most people in classic influenza are contagious probably the day before they have their fever. They have a fever for a day or two, headache, sore throat, cough, and then they're better. Some people, especially those that are immunocompromised or little kids, can cough for up to a week. So there's no patent answer for this. It's variable.
So I have an 18-month-old granddaughter, and her daddy's a school teacher, and he's really uncomfortable about her getting the H1N1 vaccine. But she's in a daycare center with 5 other little kids that are cold, fever, flu, coughing, sneezing, all over the place. What would be your recommendation to those parents of these small kids?
Right. And I think the key here is hand washing. Okay. Making sure that we are, as healthcare workers or daycare workers, washing our hands. If we have kids that are sick, they shouldn't go to daycare. Now that's really hard. You know what the culture of daycare is.
Right, right.
It's very hard for a parent every time that their kid has a small fever to say, oh, you got to stay home and I'm not going to go to work.
Right.
But we really do have to change that culture if we want to protect our kids. So these aren't really racy things. Washing your hands, staying home when you're sick, teaching our kids to cover their cough will probably do a lot to prevent the spread of this in daycare settings. But let's assume that a kid goes to school when they're sick. And best thing we can do is, because this would be a priority group, is to give a vaccination for H1N1.
I know they're doing the research. Parents have been asking this question. The research is not quite out there yet, but have you heard, as our health officer for Kitsap County, is it safe to give the vaccine to our children?
Yeah, I don't think this vaccine is so radically different from any other seasonal influenza manufacturing process that there's a big need for concern. There are also safety studies that are going on as we speak, including Group Health, who has been involved in these.
Okay.
And the word to date is there really have not been a large amount of side effects. So I'm comfortable enough to actually immunize all 3 of my children, myself. So this is how it plays out. Now, my wife is not under 25. She's close.
Okay.
And she's not a healthcare worker, so
Okay.
she doesn't really fit the criteria for who is a high-risk priority group for H1N1. But I, as a healthcare worker, am, and my 3 kids, who are all under 25, are. So that's how it's going to play out in our family. It's not that my wife won't be protected. We'll all wash our hands. We'll all stay home if we're sick. And if any of the kids get sick, I'll probably be the caregiver for them.
There you go. Okay, so then we expect the vaccine in Kitsap County sometime in mid-October, around there. We know that we have to wash our hands, cover our cough. I call it the Batman cover. That's what we've been promoting. We know about how long the children will be sick. Is there anything else that we should be telling the families in Kitsap County how to protect themselves?
Yeah, I think really this is a family plan for other things other than just washing your hands and covering your cough. You got to plan for who's going to stay home if the kids are sick. Okay. Can you miss work? And if you're a sole business owner, if your kids are sick, how are you going to run your business? What are the critical functions you need to do? What are you going to do? What is your plan for your family? Those are the keys that need to be done before we get to this flu season. We're starting to see a little bit of activity in the schools. Okay. In school-age kids. But it is not certainly at rates like WSU has seen at this point. But we're on the alert for it. So in our family, if the kids get sick, I will likely stay home so my wife doesn't get exposed. We'll wash our hands. I'll be able to cover at work. I've already got a plan in place for another health officer who could cover. All these things are forethought that need to go into planning for your own family.
So if our business community, if families have any additional questions or concerns, who should they contact?
Well, most of the businesses in this county, as you know, were contacted by the Medical Reserve Corps, where we actually coordinated with the Department of Emergency Management and the Health District to send out a message of what we've just talked about with signage for cover your cough and what to do for your business contingency planning. So if there's still a need for people to know this, they can contact the Health District or even Department of Emergency Management.
Scott, are there any medications to treat the flu?
Yeah, influenza is a little different than other respiratory viruses in the sense that once you get infected with influenza, there are some antivirals that can help shorten the duration of how long you're ill. The problem is it's very tricky. Seasonal flu is resistant to many of these antivirals, but the H1N1 still remains susceptible to some of the newer antivirals. So the whole goal, though, is to really vaccinate yourself so you don't have to deal with the infection. There are plenty of antivirals. They are in our pharmacies right now, and there is a federal stockpile, and we've really educated the medical providers on how to use them. The whole issue, though, is you've really got to be started on these within 48 hours of becoming ill. So for most people, you know, when you get ill with influenza, you tend not to go to your medical provider. And I don't think we need to rush people to the emergency room or to your medical provider. If you have just fever and cough and you're not in a high-risk group and you're doing well, you can stay home. Plenty of rest, plenty of fluids, and something to treat your fever so you're comfortable. Okay? Aspirin is not a good idea with influenza. If you are one of these high priority groups, say kids under 5 or certainly underlying conditions, then you should contact your provider, and getting you started on antivirals within 48 hours is your best chance at shortening your duration of illness.
I heard you say aspirin's not good, so does that mean Tylenol?
Yeah, Tylenol or ibuprofen are effective, but we've had conditions in the past where when people had influenza and took aspirin together that they had a serious complication from it.
Okay, let's see. Did we get all, what can I do for my child? So if our child is sick, stay home.
Right.
Take care of the child. Take care of the fever.
Right.
Okay. Is there, how long I will be out sick we're not quite sure. It depends on the person.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has a different response to the virus. Some people get a fever and cough, and for 2 days they're ill, but then their fever goes away. Some people with underlying conditions may be sick for longer. And unfortunately, in this virus, some people don't fit any of the criteria, and they have no fever. They may just have a sore throat, but they're still infectious. There's really some clear guidelines on when to go back to work or back to school. Every school district in Kitsap County is following a guideline of once a kid is sick and they become afebrile for 24 hours without the use of Tylenol or ibuprofen, then they can come back to school. It's a little more complicated for the healthcare worker, because what we're recommending for healthcare workers at this point, and it may change, is once you get sick with what appears to be influenza, you're out for 7 days. So from the start of your illness till 7 days have elapsed, you really should be out as a healthcare worker. Now, if you get to the end of your 7 days and you still have a fever, well, you need to stay out until 24 hours after that. That's confusing for a medical community, but you can understand we're saying that to the medical community because they're in contact with high-risk folks and have the potential for spread. This may change during the flu season. If it still really remains mild, we may try and sync 24 hours out of school without a fever, and then also for healthcare workers if we can get there. But for now, those are the guidelines.
Wow. All right, so tell us, to prevent the spread of flu, be it H1N1 or seasonal flu, what do we do? Well,
there's really 4 things that we should be doing. We should be covering our coughs so we don't expose others to our potential illness. We should be washing our hands so we're not spreading it, because these are really the way that flu are spread. It's not spread through the air. The third thing is not to go to work or to school if you're ill. And then the last thing is to get your influenza vaccine. Seasonal influenza if you meet those high priority groups, and then H1N1 when it's here in mid-October.
So we've heard it from the experts. We now know what to do. So please, everybody, remember, it is flu season. Thank you.